Good evening. You're tuning in to Law. We're going to talk about something very important, but not something that's spoken publicly in most instances, which is rent law in Sri Lanka. Because you see, there's quite a lot of houses and properties on rent, but only very few people know exactly what the law that governs it and how it has been implemented over the years. And to talk more about it, we do have with us Mr. Ian Fernando, Senior Counsel and Attorney at Law. Good evening to you, sir.
Good evening.
Let's start with the rent law before it was implemented here in Sri Lanka, because to go back beyond the 1972, how was it?
There was what we call the Rent Restriction Act with certain limitations on landlords and tenants, how they should act when they are giving a premises or a residential or a business premises on rent. With the development of that in this Honorable Sirimavu Bandaranaike government time, there was the Rent Act to place, which is the Rent Act 7 of 1972, which also monitored the rent law between the landlord and the tenant. Thereafter, you will see that the rent law brought in by them had certain regulations in which the landlord and tenant has to occupy himself. For example, they calculated something called the standard rent, which is the rent that should be given, authorized rent or standard rent that has to be given tenant to the landlord. And that computation came with a formula, that is, when the premises was taken its annual value, the first assessment, the annual value, plus the rates and taxes added, divided by 12 is a figure that you will reach. If the figure is under 100, standard rent is under 100, then a different law apply. If the standard rent is over 100, different set of laws would apply. So, that was the basic outline on how the Rent Act was formulated for poor people and middle class people, that they had some recourse to stay in the said premises on a legal footing.
And let me ask, sir, just like what you mentioned, so up until 1972, we had a different set of rules in the country. 72 when the Act was enacted, and in 77, I think it was reformed again after the government change. And 1980 as a mark here, where you look at before and after, if the premises was under the ownership or whether it was on rent. So, how did this whole thing pan about?
Rent Act in 1972 Act was very stringent. Then thereafter, the certain amendments made it a little more easier for the landlord and tenant, and they brought in acts which made the Rent Act a little more flexible. So, for example, they would say there are accepted premises from the Rent Act. The accepted premises from the Rent Act is that the Rent Act does not govern those premises. So, to enable one to ascertain whether it is accepted premises or not, there are matters that you should consider. Whether the premises is built after the 1st of January 1980. If the premises has been built or let out for the first time after 1980, the rent law does not apply. Then they also brought in certain conditions that the rent law need not be applied if by chance the premises was built before 1980, but let out for the first time after 1980. So, in those circumstances, with a few more others, they brought an exemption which brought the premises of the residential or business premises as accepted premises from the Rent Act.
Since you mentioned all of this, when you look at all of this, the number and all of it from 1980, that 40 years ahead, and what Sri Lanka is going on, and a lot of places are on rent, and especially when it comes to apartments and things of sort. If you look at the number, the calculation of the Rent Act, is a very small number. You mentioned about being 100 or below or above. But nowadays, if you look in and around Colombo and suburbs, the numbers are a lot more than what is actually stipulated. Is it legal? What is the binding?
It's
How do we go
perfectly
about it?
legal so long as it is built after 1980, and also if it's let out for the first time after 1980, the rent law doesn't apply. If the rent applied section 7 of 1972, it's classified as I said under 100 and over 100. If your rent is under 100, the standard rent, as I mentioned the calculation, even if a court gives on requirement that the landlord needs the premises, the tenant need not leave premises until the National Housing Commission has found him an alternative accommodation or a premises for him to go. So, National Housing Commission had so many flats. So, you get your turn, and even if judgment is entered on the first date against the tenant, he did not leave the premises until the National Housing Commission has found him an alternative accommodation. The question of over 100 rent, what happens is, if the landlord deposits 5 years of rent, standard rent, then he can ask on reasonable requirement and ask the premises back. Those are the fundamentals in the Rent Act of 1972. Plus, it goes to say that if section 12, if you use a residential premises for a business premises, that's a grounds for which you can be ejected. And section 22 of Rent Act sets out the various grounds under that particular act where you could be ejected, or a court can be formulated against you for ejectment.
And with regards to all of this, if a tenant wants to move out or the landlord needs the house, if he requests for it, what's the minimum time period that they should give lead time to the tenant to leave the premises?
In the case of under 100, they have to give 6 months notice to quit. In the case of over 100, they need to give 1 month notice to quit. Those are all calendar months, 1 full calendar month. If you give anything short of that, your action will fail in the particular district court that you are for ejectment. The thing that we see in the Rent Act is section 36, where it talks about leases. The Rent Act acknowledges 1972 that you lease any premises. The lease must be not less than 2 years and not more than 5 years. So, by chance you want to get your premises back in the 3rd year or the 4th year, you can mention a happening event in the lease agreement. For examples, when my daughter gets married, the landlord can say, I need the premises and I will give you adequate notice. So, if your daughter gets married in the 4th year of that lease, you can certainly send him a notice, as you have mentioned a happening of an event, and ask the premises back under the lease. Those were the provisions that are the main outlines in the Rent Act 7 of 1972.
So, this Rent Act, since you mentioned 1980 as a benchmark here, where anything built afterwards, and if it was let out for the first time after 1980, 1st of June, it does not come under the purview of rent law. So, rent law and beyond 1980, if it is so, if someone gets into a dispute with his landlord, or if the landlord has a dispute with the tenant, what do they do?
So, there are 2 types. You can have a tenancy, month to month tenancy, or you can have a written lease agreement, which we will be discussing in the next episode of ours. If it is a month to month tenancy, under the common law, you need to give 1 month's notice. And if you overstay that 1 month's notice, you can ask for damages for unlawful occupation of the said premises due to you being an overholding tenant of the premises. So, for examples, if you say by 30th of September you were to vacate the premises and you are still being staying there till the 15th of October, the landlord is entitled to ask for damages caused by your unlawful occupation, which will be not the amount stipulated as rent, but as damages, and would be a heavier amount than the rent.
That's true. One more thing when you adapt to all of this is the security deposits. A lot of people ask when it comes to tenants. Maybe in instances you see some of the people asking for 3 months to 6 months. In cases there have been instances of even 12 months. What is the law governing this? Is there a stipulated amount or multiplication of the original fee? Is there a particular number that you need to work with?
Under the Rent Act, there was no stipulated amount that you could work out to say that you had to give a security deposit, or sometimes they call it key money. But in normal practice, sometimes they say key money, and they use that key money from the rent. You see that happening in lease agreements. However, the security deposit is a little different to the key money. A security deposit is taken off normally 1 month for any damages that are caused to the premises during your occupation. For examples, if it was given with a good first class air conditioning unit, you can't break it and put in a third class air conditioning unit. Or if you had a very plush toilet, you cannot make breakages on the toilet seats and the cistern and get away. That will be reduced from your security deposit, because that is meant for breakages. And also it is meant for people who go off without paying their electricity bill, water bill, and sometimes even the lease rental or the rental that is due. So those sums are reduced from that security deposit, and refundable security deposit that one would hand over at the point tenant leaves the landlord.
And since you mentioned about these monthly payments, I'd like to get into the next question of in case of a tenant not paying water, electricity, and certain instances telephone bill on a monthly basis, it's the landlord who loses the opportunity, or maybe if it's seized, if it's cut off, he will have to pay the electricity board or the water board to get it back again or researched. So how do you go about that kind of situation?
Analyzing the Rent Act 7 of 1972, they had a special provision in section 15 or 16 of the Act, where the landlord has to provide the utility amenities, light, water, electricity, etc. That's on the part of the landlord. He cannot wait without supplying those. If that is so, your public amenities are cut off, and you could make an application to the rent board saying that he has infringed your public amenities which you have right to have, and to restore them. I have seen many rent boards restoring them. Under the new law, that is after 1980, we don't have that taking place. So if one cuts your electricity, water supply, or your public amenities are cut in some way, the only recourse you will have in the law is to formally make a police complaint, and then you will have to go to court. That is the only way that you can get your water and electricity back. There is no other forum that you could make a complaint to.
And that's something that we have seen in many instances where a lot of the landlords do complain of the fact that when it comes to the last month or the last couple of months, the tenant would avoid paying bills and then vacates the premises without settling it, and it ends up with the landlord. So
that is correct. That is correct. When it comes to last 2-3 months, they avoid paying because the electricity board and the water board also sends their bills a little late. So by the time the tenant has left the premises, the landlord is in a soup where he will have to pay those. But you can have a specific clause in a lease agreement that it has to be paid by the tenant, and in the event it usurps the amount that is set out as the fixed amount for damages, the security deposit, even the extra balance he is supposed to pay. You can have a clause inserted in your tenancy agreement or in your lease agreement.
Tenancy agreement is something that I think a lot of people do not do when it comes to taking over a premises for a particular period. A lot of people go with the fact of verbally agreeing on a certain term and conditions with the landlord. How do we go around this situation when it comes to a dispute? If you say, I've agreed upon 1 month's key money or for security deposit, it's not written anywhere, there is no signature or a document to show for. How do you go about solving a dispute?
The only way is now, of the recent trend, everything is done by emails. So if there's offer and acceptance on the tenancy, of the contract of tenancy, you can set out everything that you are offering this premises. The fixed amount of security is so much, monthly rental is so much, and you can have a correspondence between the two parties. But if it's word of mouth, it's hard to prove in any court that you are supposed to pay the rent on this time, or the deposit was a refundable deposit, or that the air conditioners and accessories and the furniture supplied was in good order and condition, unless you have itemized inventory, unless you have a video recording of how you took the premises. The landlord can say that the premises are deteriorated because you have fixed air conditioners and drilled holes in the premises, and you are liable to pay, when he himself may have agreed to fix the air conditioners, and due to his not fixing, you would have had to do that. So that all goes by word of mouth, unless you have some email correspondence of both parties agreeing on the subject. Taking the Rent Act 7 of 1972, if you make any structural alterations to a premises and you make some varying things on the building without the permission of the landlord, you are guilty of an offence that you could be tried for eviction. However, in that famous bucket latrine case, where the tenant who had a bucket latrine given by the landlord had improved the toilet at his own expenditure, and that was termed to be not a situation in which there were structural alterations detrimental to the owner of the premises. So it was taken as a plus point. But still, all alterations, whether in the Rent Act or outside the Rent Act, has to be naturally done with the permission of the landlord. He cannot change the status and the way of the building without the permission of the landlord.
So that's where everything boils down to. It's about getting prior approval or permission, as you clearly mentioned, with regards to any, because something that we most often see, parents rent houses because of their children having to go to school, and when you have small children, the chances of walls getting discolored and all sorts of debris written all over it is something that we see. So even to things like color washing, that needs to be approved by the landlord, isn't it?
Yes, because the colors that he wants, and normally you see the simple wear and tear of the building is adhered to, but not certainly scraping walls and writing on walls. That type of thing you cannot be done. So once you are returning the premises back, you will have to put the premises in the same order and condition to the landlord once you are parting company with him.
Right. So since we have reached the last 5 minutes on the show, sir, if we go back to the beginning of it, if we are to take the premises on rent, what do we need to do first? You mentioned about having a proper agreement with inventories and all of that, and if possible, have video footage. What is the best advice for someone who's looking for a house to take on rent, and what do we do as a landlord and what do we do as a tenant?
The condominium building one strike me first. First you must see whether it has a certificate of conformity, whether it is approval by the landlord by our Sri Lankan law that he can rent out the premises. Then you have to go into the square area and where its location to think of whether the rent is correct or whether it's a high amount that they are demanding. The next you must see the conditions that are given by the landlord. The access he has to see the premises, whether he has to give you written access to the premises or just he can walk into your premises. The security deposit, how much is claiming, up to what amount repairs, minor repairs that you would have to do, like replacing a tap or replacing a bulb, up to 10,000, and he does the balance work. That's a very important clause. And today's context with so many things happening, it should not be for immoral purpose. There's so much of drug scenes going on. The condominium must be not used for immoral purpose. That's a condition that is very much necessary. And also the fact that the occupation is going to cause nuisance to the neighboring people, especially if you are having a dog or something like that, that should be mentioned, because if you are causing nuisance to the opposing premises, that's going to be a hindrance. Under Rent Act, there was a case law where someone has come and put tires on the stairway, and that was considered that it was a nuisance causing the other members in the vicinity, the neighbors, in using the particular stairway. So those are the main facts that you would have to consider, and how long the lease rent is, for what a period, and what are the grounds on which you can terminate it, and you must get notice in writing, a registered post letter giving you the substantial notice required in our common law, which is 1 month for you to the premises.
So those are bits and pieces that anyone who would want to rent out a premises, or in the case of a landlord, to make sure that he is legally bound by it and that he has some sort of binding. But in Sri Lanka, sir, if you look at the Rent Act, it favors the tenant more than the landlord.
That was the idea of the scheme, that government, because there were lesser amount of premises for people. So they brought in a law that could give more house to people, and they brought in what you call the ceiling on house property law. If you had more than one house, then that house would be given to the tenant who is in the premises. Say if there are 3 people in the family, you would have only 4 houses, 1 for each and 1 for the family. Anything over that, the tenant could apply to the Indian Housing Property Authority and ask to purchase the house at a price stipulated by the government.
And this particular, just as a final question, sir, the government stipulated price is invariably very much lower than what the market price would demand. What would a landlord do in a situation of that sort?
Here, not much that he could do, because if it's vested in the National Housing Commission by the fact that he is having an excess house, the applicant, if he has under 100 rent, he has a very good scope of acquiring that property on the price stipulated to be paid to the landlord. So the title will pass as soon as he pays that amount to the landlord.
So that's something for everyone out there to keep in mind. We have come to the end of the show, and it's my pleasure thanking you for being with us and sharing your expertise. Mr. Ian J. Fernando sharing his expertise on rent law, something a lot of people need to get to know. And I think since a lot of places are up for rent and people are on rent, and maybe if you have an extra premises, you might be wanting to rent it out in the future. So these are facts that you need to know, and make sure that it's legal, that you have some sort of document to show for, because in the end, if there is a dispute, if it's a verbal agreement, chances are you might lose out. So that's something to keep in mind, and something to ponder over in the next week or so. And with that, it's time for me to say goodbye on today's edition of Law and Order. See you the same time next week as well. It's bye-bye from me.